Hello YouTube friends. It's a cold, grey, rainy Sunday afternoon in the middle of summer. I've actually lit the fire and I've got a jumper on, I'm so cold. So even though I wanted to get outside into the garden, it wasn't really a very good day for it. So I've spent the day stitching. I've been sewing together this piece here. Now, you can see straight away, can't you? This piece is like that piece. And I want to explain to you what it is I'm doing. But also, as I was stitching today, how this idea for this video came about. Now, the quilt behind me is in the quilt sandwich, all pinned together. It's Agnes's quilt for when she comes to stay at Grandma's. And I'm no further on with it because there's two quilting patterns in my head that I want to try out. And I don't want to try them out on this, and so that's why I'm making, so I thought I'll make a couple of samples and I'll do one quilting pattern on one and one on the other. And then I thought, well, I might as well make them into something rather than, well, just make them into a sample. So these are going to be two little cushions that will go on the bed when it's finished. Now, whenever I post anything about English paper piecing or Agnes's quilt or anything, I get lots and lots of questions from people asking me all sorts of things about how to do this. So many times people ask me these things. So I thought today I would make a video that was answering all those questions, but showing you in great detail how I put these things together and all my thought processes for how I make English paper piecing. So here's the disclaimer right from the start. This is how I make English paper piecing. Everybody else has their own style and their own way of doing things, but this works for me. And the many times that I've read in comments, you've inspired me to start my own English paper piecing, or I used to do this years ago and I'd like to start again but I'm not quite sure how, or my mum used to do this and I'd really like to. And so I want to answer the questions, the very basic questions. So forgive me right from the start if these questions are going to be so basic that you already know what I'm talking about. Because in fact I have answered quite a lot of these questions in other videos, but I thought I would put everything into one place right here. So let's do that. Let's do that. Now, English paper piecing then. It's taking two pieces of fabric that are attached to a template, sewing them together and then making a bigger piece. First of all then, I want to talk about the papers. And I'm just going to be talking about hexagons today, but any shape that will fit together and tessellate together will work as English paper piecing. And so, but today I'm just going to talk to you about hexagons. I might talk to you about squares as well, because I've got a squares project over there, but we'll start with hexagons. Now, a lot of people say to me, what sort of paper do you use? And you'll have noticed if you watch the video about me taking the papers out of this quilt here, or any other time that I make papers for English paper piecing, that I use children's books. I use books I buy from charity shops for about £1 each. Sometimes they're so damaged they just give them to me. I used to work at a charity shop in the town near me, and I know the girl there very well, and so she is very happy for me to take these books. Now, these aren't books that anybody would want to read. They've been scribbled in, or pages torn or damaged in some way, which is why they're one step from landfill. But if you feel the paper, that's what I go by. I don't care what the book's about, but the paper's got a lovely kind of stiffness to it, but it's not too stiff. Now later on, if you carry on watching this, you'll see when I'm sewing the papers together, you'll see why having a bit of bend in the paper is really, really useful. Now, I use these because the quality of the paper is perfect, but I also have to admit that I really enjoy, so you know, you've got a little bit of a bee family here, and I really enjoy it when you get a paper that's got some little thing when I'm taking them out, or even when I'm stitching them together. I really enjoy seeing there, look, there's a bit of somebody there in that. It makes me laugh. So that's a bonus. The paper's the right size and the right thickness for what I'm doing. Now the whole, you see that one's all scribbled on. You couldn't sell this book, or nobody would want this book again. That one too. The puzzle's been finished. Who wants that? So the whole, everything to do with English paper piecing is about accuracy. And so if these are cut sloppily with scissors and not quite right, and they don't fit together, you're not going to get a very good result. And so the accuracy of cutting these templates is where we start. Now, there are many companies who sell templates for you, ready cut on their clever machines, and that can be a good idea if you want to get started with English paper piecing, is to buy pre-cuts. I've done that before when it's been a shape that I haven't had the cutter for, because I have this wonderful machine. It's a Sizzix machine. Now, before we go any further, I'm not sponsored by any of the people that I'm going to talk to you about, but Sizzix, this is a very interesting little contraption. It's got no mechanical parts at all. I can't imagine what would make this break. And with Sizzix, now people ask me many times, where did you get your Sizzix machine from? And I got this one. This is the Sizzix Big Shot, which always makes me laugh. And I got this when I went to the Festival of Quilts about 5 years ago, maybe more. And the Sizzix people were demonstrating their product there on a trade stand. And I just thought, you know, now's the time to get a Sizzix machine. You also need to buy these things. And I've got a few of these in different shapes. And these are the dies that cut the paper or the fabric, because you can cut both. And so what I'm going to do now then is show you how I cut the children's book paper on my Sizzix machine to make these inch hexagons. So we'll do that now. So first of all then, I'm going to just tear some pages out of the book. And I'm going to fold them in half. Now I've already discovered just how big it is I need to make this. It fits on there beautifully. So I'm going to cut this in half now. And now I'm going to take 5 of these pieces. That's enough. You don't want to strain the machine too much. And I'm going to line it up, making certain that this top bit here is covered with paper, and the 2 side bits are as well. Now this machine works by using 2 pieces of Perspex. I need a new piece of Perspex for the top bit, I think, but it's all right, it works fine. Let's make some space here. And then I feed the little sandwich in there and roll this handle. And what comes out at the end there is perfectly accurate hexagons that are an inch along that side there. Now I have another die here. If you can see, this is bigger. This is 1.5 inches. And so of course you could cut paper templates that big, but most of the work I do, I use inch hexagons. Okay, so now when the next one's coming up, I'm just going to line the top of that one up there with that line there. Just make sure it's covered in all directions, and then we'll do it again. So I've just got this red fabric. I don't actually need these hexagons cutting, but I'll show you what happens. I'll just cut this off because, as I say, I don't need these. So we get the fabric that's bigger than the piece we need, and we send that through the machine now. And what we've got now is two very accurately cut fabric pieces. And if we get one of our inch hexagons, you can see then how beautifully that fits in there for sewing. But I also think that it creates quite a lot of waste, so I tend not to do that. I'll show you what I do. And so in this box here, this is where I keep all my papers, and sometimes I'll cut the fabrics with that die cut, but sometimes I'll just cut a scrap of fabric like that one because I know that I can fit my template. It doesn't actually matter if the back of that is a bit tatty because it's the front you need. If you cut your fabric with the die cutter, you'll end up with it looking a little bit neater on the back, but it doesn't bother me too much if it looks a little bit untidy on the back. So next we're going to talk about basting. Now, basting is a bit of a minefield, and everyone has their own opinion about how to do that. Now, it doesn't actually matter how you do it. If you want to glue baste, that's fine if that's what you're used to doing. If you want to thread baste, which is what I like to do, also fine. And there is a third way of just tacking the little corners together. I've never done that. I wouldn't be able to demonstrate that one, but you just tack a little stitch to hold the corners in, and then when it comes to taking the papers out, you just slip them out. Never tried that one. I'm a thread baster because my mum taught me how to thread baste, and it works, and I like taking the papers out. I think I like taking the papers out better than if I'd glued them. I've seen some videos of people taking the papers out with glue, and it looks it looks a little messier than my method, but I'm not here to teach you one way. I just want to show you what I do, and you can make your own mind up. Glue basters, good for you, I say. Now, here we go then. So we've got our accurately cut template and our bit of fabric. In this case, I did cut it on the Sizzix machine, but it could quite easily be something else that's in here, a scrap of fabric. Now, before I baste that one, I'll just tell you one thing that you can do. If you're using inch hexagons, like I am, and you've got some spare charm squares that are 5 inches square, if you're very careful and you fold this very carefully in half and then very carefully in half again, and do it so that each quarter is really even, so there's not one bit that's going to be bigger than any other. And then if you cut those apart, you can see that you can fit a hexagon on there with just the right amount of seam allowance. So if you want a lot of variety in what you're making, charm squares are a good idea, because you can get a whole pack of charm squares and get 4 from each charm. I did that a lot with this quilt behind me here, but you do have to cut really carefully so as not to make one bit a bit smaller than the other. But I'm going to thread baste this now and show you how I do it. Now, this one's one of the machine cut ones. I have a good strong knot on the end of my tacking thread, a big knot. In fact, you know, there wouldn't be any harm in doing 2 knots on the end of there. And this is the way I do a knot. The way my mum taught me is just by putting it round my finger, rolling it and then pulling it off. My mum taught me how to do that. My mum taught me lots of these little skills. Okay, so now I'm wondering if I should put that camera in. Yes, I will. I'll just get my little close-up camera sorted. So I hold my hexagon so that I can see a lovely even edge all the way around the outside. And then fold the first edge in, and I finger press it just to make sure it behaves itself, and do one stitch through the paper like so. On a hexagon, the next thing you do is fold down that bit there, and always be pressing it with your finger and thumb so that it butts right up to the paper. And I put my needle in right there, so it goes through all of those corner pieces there, through like so. And again, just keep them all firmly up to the fabric. Fold this bit over like that, give it a press, and then your needle goes through that fold all the way through there, and then just out halfway along the edge. Next one, press it down, needle in there, out we come. And then this fifth one here, there's of course 6 sides to a hexagon, press that with your thumb and finger and give that a stitch. Now this last one, you've got 2 edges to fold. It's no different really, but you just need to press both of them and fold them down carefully, then through there and there, come back up there, and now one more stitch so that you've got an overstitch to keep everything in place. And so the stitches on the back hold everything in place, and they're easy to get out because they're nice and big. And when we come to that part, I'll show you how I take the hexagons out, or I'll show you how I take the paper shape out. So that's one basted hexagon, and I pop it in my box with all my others. And that's one lovely job that you can do watching the telly or sitting on the train or whatever. I don't really go very far on trains, but I remember many a happy train trip where I've taken along a bag of stitching to do and done that. Okay then, so now the next thing we need to talk about is designing. And I want to show you how I design something as big as this, but also something quite small as well, like this little cushion. Now, I've spoken about this before, but I like to use this polystyrene. In fact, I did a video where I replaced the cover on this polystyrene board behind me. It's such a useful thing. It's just there on a spare bit of wall that isn't being used for anything else, and pins go into it absolutely beautifully and hold everything in place and allow you to do that thing where you can step back and look at it and reorganize it. And at the moment this is just sitting up there waiting for me to take it down and stitch it, so it's not all folded up and put away, out of sight, out of mind. It's actually right there waiting for me to do the hand stitching. But it's obviously not portable, and so I make these little portable boards out of scraps of polystyrene. Now, polystyrene, styrofoam, sort of building insulation material, and I buy it from the builders merchants in my local town. For these very big ones, they actually delivered 2 for me, which was brilliant because there's no way I could get them in my car. But if you want to make a little portable one like this, all you would need is a little scrap of polystyrene, which I then cover with quilt wadding. That's what's going on here. And this is a marvellous thing. I'll just pin that back on again so that I can show you what I'm doing. So this is a marvellous way of designing a small piece like this. Now, I've spent the last day or so just stitching these together in odd moments, and I've got a little bit at the top still to stitch on. And then over on this board here, all of these are just single hexagons. I did actually start off by thinking I would make a wash of colour like on Agnes's quilt, but in fact this is too small a scale for a wash to work, so I've done a whole blue section and a whole green section, and I'll try my quilting stitches out on them when I'm ready to do that. So here it is, look, just a little piece of polystyrene covered over with quilt wadding, which I've anchored down with pins into the side here, and this then means that I can store this, just prop it up against the wall or work on it or do whatever I like. It's a really helpful tool. And so there's another helpful thing though, and I've mentioned this before as well. Once you've got a configuration that you like and you take it off the board to work, how do you stop getting yourself muddled up? Now, I have mentioned this before in a video, but I'm putting all my tips and tricks into this one video here for you, so I'll tell you again. I'll just take my thimble off. Sometimes I forget I've got that on. So I'll just put that in my little pot there. It doesn't matter where you start, but just decide that you're going to start somewhere. So let's call this row 1. Why not? Okay, so I'm going to call this row 1. Of course there's no space, is there? And write a 1 on there. And so this becomes 1B. One C. I'm having to open it up a little bit to find the paper, but that's okay. A, B, C, 1D. Make sure that's a proper D, not an A. 1D. 1E. 1F, if. And finally 1G. Okay, now marking it like that gives you all the information you need to put it together again when you start sewing. So you could take, once I've numbered all of these, I could take them all off and I would be able to put that jigsaw back together again if I needed to do that. So let me show you that marking system a bit more clearly. This is one of the patchwork dogs I like to make, and this is square, EPP squares. And so we're sticking those two squares together and stitching along there, that line there. Now, I marked this all out on the back, and I'll show you what this looks like here. I think you can see that a little bit more clearly, especially if I zoom it in a bit. You can see that I've got my numbers here so that I could very easily find them and pick them up to use to sew together. So that's one side done, but then on this, the unfinished part here, on the back of here, here's 2, C, D, B, so this is row 2, which equates to that one there, and then on here, this is 1, so this is the dog's nose here, so that one goes there, and this is 2 here, and I can now, by looking on the back of here, find, and they're all in stacks actually, so there's all the 4s, 4A, C, 3 and so on, and here's Rita to come and approve of this system. Do you think this is a good system, Kat? Could I ask you to get out, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyway, you can see, can't you, that marking the backs of your squares like that, it might be a little bit of a jigsaw when you're putting them back together again, but it really does make a portable project for your English paper piecing. Another really good idea is to photograph this now on your phone, so that if one falls out, and my son John likes to rearrange them when I'm not looking. So if one of them falls out, you can, or gets misaligned by any devious means, then you can check back on your photograph and see that it's actually where it's supposed to be. So that's my tip for organising these so that you can find them really easily and keep them in the right order. For this little piece, it's actually not terribly important really how it looks. This one, I spent a huge amount of time designing this, but with this it's just a lot of greens, and with the other a lot of blues that will fit together. The only thing I did really was make sure that they weren't two together at the same next door to each other. And but if you're making something that you really want to check the distribution of the colours and the shades and the tones, then my tip of taking a photograph and putting it into grayscale, which is one a lot of designers use. So you just take a photo on your phone and you go into the settings and adjust the colour till it's black and white or grayscale. Then you can see the distribution of colours, and it's a good way of showing you if there's too many darks at one end, too many lights all clustered together, or a big dark bit in the middle, and you can look at that and you can redistribute them that way. It's a good way of designing. But this one I haven't done because it's just a small sample piece. I don't need to do that. Now we get to the point where we're stitching these together. When I'm stitching the hexagons together, I'm using a good quality cotton. At the moment I've got some Aurifil on this little spool that I've just taken across from my sewing machine. And I also use a good quality needle so that it's nice and thin and glides through the fabric. I'm really grateful to my friend Kath, who's the long arm quilter who lives just over the border into Scotland. And she put me onto these needles here. Bohin needles. Whoops. I'm having trouble focusing. There. And I really like them. They're very thin, and that's the only packet I've got. I've got to put them back in when I've finished using them, otherwise they'll get mixed up with my other needles. And that might have happened here, in fact. Oh, there it is. Now it's thin. It's very thin. But, and it can be a little bit tricky to thread, but it's worth the effort. Thanks, Kath. Now, I thread up this needle, and actually just bear with me while I thread it up because it does take a minute or two. There we go. And I'm not using a very long piece of thread. It's not long at all, because you'll see when I start stitching this that my stitches are very, very close together indeed. And so if the thread goes through the fabric again and again and again, it will get weak and snap, even good quality thread like this is. This is Aurifil, 60, whatever the sewing weight is. Now I'm going to sew these two edges together. And this is where you can see that the accuracy of cutting the papers, but also the accuracy of stitching the fabric onto the papers really is repaid now, because those two edges line up absolutely beautifully. So I'm going to line them up like so. And then this is just my habit, you know, I don't know what other people do, but I just slide my needle into that fold there. And so that you don't have to do that, you can start any way you like. And now I'm going to do, starting at the very end, I'm going to do my over stitches. I do 2 or 3 at the beginning to anchor it there, and now I'm going to sew this edge together. And I get about 20 stitches, I bet there's someone counting, isn't there, in a run here. That's why this needle's so cool, because when you're putting the needle into the fabric, you're just doing it into the fold. You're not going anywhere near the paper, which means that actually when you take the papers out, there shouldn't be any sign of perforations along the edge there. I mean, it doesn't matter if you clip the paper the odd time, you know, that's not a big problem, but what you want to be really careful of is not clipping it on every stitch. You can feel quite easily where the two folds come together with your needle. So I'm going to get to the end here now. Now, when you've done the two sides together, line up that little angle there really well and give it a couple of over stitches there, and have a look. And what, for me, I really like to not see the stitches on the outside, and I think you can see, if you tug them there you can see them, but sometimes on English paper piecing you can see this kind of ladder of stitches, and I don't like to see that. So that's one side, but now we've got to think about putting in the next hexagon into this angle here, and this is where we've got another thing that we want to try to avoid. We want to try to avoid a hole where those three angles come together, and so that's something else that I like to try and eliminate if I can. So line up my lovely accurate hexagon, and here's my angle here, and now I'm going to do, just to prepare this hole here, or rather absence of hole let's call it, I'm going to do 2 or 3 over stitches here, and then just like last time I'm going to sew along this edge here. You get into a lovely rhythm of this where you can feel that you're in the fold, not the paper. You can take your time to do a good number of stitches. When I'm pulling the thread, I'm not tugging it really hard, but I'm sort of bedding the stitches in kind of firmly. I don't want to break the thread. You know, like I said earlier, what we've got to be careful of is not stressing the thread going through this amount of fabric so many times, which is why I use a shorter length. And then preparing for this next angle here, I'm going to do 2 or 3 over stitches here. Now, that's that edge done now, but the next edge we need to do is this one here, but my thread's here. So what I tend to do, you can cut that off now if you want to, but I tend to just carry my thread back 1, 2, 3 stitches back to my 3 angles again, and then when I open this out now, I'm ready now with my thread in the right place. Now we start sewing the piece together now. These beautiful accurate hexagons tessellate beautifully, so you can fold that one over the one you're about to sew. But what I like to do now, and this is especially becomes apparent on a bigger piece, I fold that hexagon shape in half, and this is why I like to use the weight of paper that I do and not thicker card, because that folds really easily, which now means that I'm certain that this line here is lined up absolutely perfectly to do the next line of stitching. I know I'm going on about this, but making this video, it's occurring to me that I want to go right into the details, in great detail, of how to do this fantastic craft. I love it. So when I get to the end of this run here, I'll try and do it a bit quicker. I'll just get to, actually I'm not going to rush it, because I'd still need to do the same amount of close stitches. And when I get to this angle at the top here, I could go on and attach another hexagon, but for the purposes of this demonstration I'll stop and show you how I finish if I'm taking the thread off. So I get to the end here and I do 1, 2, 3 over stitches. As I say, I could attach another one here, but I'm going to detach the thread now, and I do that by wrapping the thread 3 or 4 times round the needle shaft, pull it out like so, and then I snip that off. And when I open this out now, you can see there's no hole in the middle of that. Those 3 edges are beautifully sewn together, and then you'll carry on and on until you get a quilt the size of Agnes's quilt. Now, it's slow progress, but that's what hand stitching's all about, isn't it? It's not about a quick finish. You know, we sew on the sewing machine if we want to get something done quickly. But this is the joy of stitching this. Over and over stitches, over and over we go. Paying particular attention to those corners. In that English paper piece tradition that goes back a long, long time. Okay now, so I like to think of all those people who've been stitching English paper piecing over the centuries. It's a very, very old technique. So that's been a really in-depth look at English paper piecing, all the papers and all the ideas and thoughts that I have about putting these pieces together. So the next time I come back with another in this little series, I'll show you how to finish the hexagons, so that, say you want to have a straight edge for a quilt like I have with Agnes's quilt, how we deal with that, and also for this sample where I'm making practice pieces for the quilting designs I want to do here, I'm going to turn them into cushions, so I'll show you how I do that as well. I'll also show you how I get on with each of the quilt patterns that I have in my head. And so thanks for watching, and subscribe and put your notifications on so you won't miss that next video that I'm going to make about this. So take care and really enjoy your hand stitching, lovely slow stitching, and I'll see you next time.